Welcome to Paranormal or Reality. We have tales about the ghost cat of the hospital, the little girl who wanders the halls, the child who visits the ER, and the spirits of the rehab unit. Enjoy another video that will make you think twice about watching this in the dark. Make sure to like and subscribe for more spooky content. I used to volunteer at the local hospital as a transporter for the rehab unit, physical, speech, and occupational therapy, and the transport department getting discharged patients to their ride home from August 2011 November 2012. Here are my strange experiences from that time. One day I was sent to find a woman in the North Tower and take her by wheelchair to the main entrance to get a ride home from family. I found her room in a corner and heard someone moving around. I knocked on the door but got no response. Hearing her still moving around, I figured she didn't hear me and was getting her belongings packed. After seeing that the door was cracked open, I knocked again. After getting no response, I slowly opened the door to find the room empty. However, the restroom door was closed. I heard the trash can getting kicked and figured the patient I was waiting on was in there. A few more minutes go by, and I decided to go to the nurse's station to ask about the patient. The nurse said nobody was in there. I told her about the restroom. She went to investigate. Nobody. But the trash can was sitting there across the room from where it would normally be, placed at an angle as though nudged there with a foot. Places like psych wards and asylums tend to have a creepy aura around them. This hospital had its own psychiatric wing, each floor dedicated to different types of patients. One floor was the suicide watch area, one was for the most dangerous patients such as violent schizophrenics, one was the geriatric unit. After getting some experience with the rehab unit under my belt, I got sent alone to the geriatric floor. The only way in was through an old elevator. The moment it first opened, I was creeped out. The back half was always cold despite having no air conditioning. It felt like hundreds of eyes were staring at you. It was always a relief to get off that elevator, and going with someone else doesn't ease the feeling. I mentioned this feeling to a few other people as I trained them only to hear them say the same. Even other volunteers reported this too. Nothing ever seemed to come of it, but it sure was eerie. The strangest thing I ever witnessed in that hospital was the one that still haunts and fascinates me till this day. People from the transport department were sent to the rehab unit to take a patient to the main entrance to catch his ride home. He looked to be in his early 40s and in peak physical shape with a muscular, athletic build. His family was with him, congratulating him on a full recovery. They were all eager to have him back home soon. The transporters were happy for him. They were going to take him to the car waiting for him outside, when all of a sudden the man clutched his chest and fell backwards onto the bed. All the nurses in the unit cleared the room to try to resuscitate him. The moment he fell, I could feel an intense dread and sadness radiating from where he just stood. The nurses realized they couldn't save him. After a few minutes, a doctor came in and determined the cause of death to be acute cardiopulmonary arrest. This was the only time I saw someone die. For the rest of the day, anyone who went to that unit's patient rooms or the hall between them could feel that same dread and sadness, with the air suddenly seeming to weigh a good 20 pounds. People who didn't know what happened coming off the elevator started pointing to the locked door to the rehab patient rooms and asking, "Did someone just pass away in there?" Within a week, the vibe went away. When I was 3 or 4, I fell pretty violently down the staircase in my family's old Massachusetts Victorian home. My parents took me to Bay State Children's Hospital one town over in Springfield, MA. I just had a busted lip from hitting the wall on the way down, because it was one of those staircases that turns and then continues downwards. My parents were concerned I hit my head, so despite my crying and protesting at the idea of going to the doctors, they took me. I remember being absolutely terrified at the idea of possibly needing stitches in my lip, so I cried the whole way there. The one good thing I remember about this place was the big playroom they had in the regular children's hospital unit. However, the children's ER only had a few of those bead toys on a wooden box with the squiggly plastic bits to slide the beads on. I don't know what they're called. I sat down in front of the toy and started sliding the blocks and beads around the loops. Then a boy started talking to me. When I looked up, He was on the other side of the toy. I remember being taken aback since I never seen gore before. The most gore I had seen was when my parents were scrambling for the remote while we were watching The Simpsons and Itchy and Scratchy came on. The side of the boy's head was cracked completely open. As I took in his injury, a strange scent hit me. Sort of a sickly sweet smell, but it was barely there, if that makes sense. I was a very anxious child, so I tried my hardest to hide my uneasiness, smiled at him, and continued to play. As I remember, he asked me, "What happened to you?" I answered that I fell down the stairs. Then I asked him, "How did you get your boo-boo?" gesturing towards my own head. He answered that he simply fell, and we kept playing. At the time, I thought he was a boy I knew from school, as he looked slightly similar, minus the cracked open head. So I felt comfortable with him after a few minutes. We chatted about how we were both afraid of being at the doctor's and of being hurt from whatever the treatment would be. That's pretty much the end of the memory. I got medicine on my lip, and they checked my head to make sure it wasn't hit during my fall. Then a month or so later, there was a fire drill at my school. We were all lined up in the parking lot, and I spotted the kid who I thought was the one in the ER with me. But to my surprise, his head was perfectly intact. Not even stitches or a scar. His hair growth was also completely uninterrupted, and I knew the doctors would shave down the hair to treat the wound. In that moment, I basically just shrugged it off as my mistake. It wasn't that kid. So finally, a few years ago when I was 20, I brought this memory up to my parents, and they had no idea what I was talking about. They remembered my fall and the trip to the ER. I was playing in the waiting room, but not any boy with a cracked open head playing along with me. They said if his head was as I described, he would not be in the waiting room just hanging out. When they said that my adult brain processed the memory again, I was basically like, "Oh yay, that's true." Then I remembered the smell that emanated from him as we talked and played. I kept trying to place it as the smell of the infection, or maybe the dried out smell inside of his wound. Then I remembered where I smelled that before, just much more strongly. When I lived in Okinawa, Japan as a preteen, there were a ton of stray cats everywhere. One day I went on a walk with my class at my international school. It was in basically a rural Japanese neighborhood with lots of farms around. As we walked up this one hill, the boy leading us started gagging and groaning. The rest of us just laughed because we thought he was either messing around or just being dramatic. Then the stench hit us. I never smelled death so strongly like that before. My eyes literally watered. We hesitantly made our way to the top of the hill in search of the source of the odor, then noticed a red-stained bag hanging off low branch on a tree. The boy who originally smelled it quickly dashed over to peek into the bag, then ran back gagging. Apparently, there were 3 cats stuffed into the grocery bag and unceremoniously hung up. It was through the memory of that smell that I identified what the scent of the boy in the ER was. It was the tangy, sweet, rotting smell of putrefying flesh, just like watered down so it was almost unnoticeable. I've been working as a veterinarian technician for about 2 years now. I remain working as one until this day at the same hospital. Being a tech isn't the easiest job. You are constantly surrounded by sick, dying pets and death. You deal with nasty messes and upset pet owners. Besides this, the job is also very rewarding, from seeing the cutest puppies and kittens to seeing a happy family when we save their pets. Going into this job, I had no idea that a spirit of an animal could lurk around. The Animal Hospital. Haunting, this is my story. It all started small. One afternoon, my coworker and I were closing the place up with no one left behind. Everything was completed. We began to pack up our stuff. All of a sudden, a huge crashing sound arose coming from the laundry room. Terrified, we were convinced someone had broken in to steal drugs, since that had happened before. The 2 of us, being stupid, went into the laundry room and just peeked our heads in to see if we saw anyone. To our surprise, no one was there. We proceeded to look down at the floor, and everything was knocked over in the room. It was absolutely trashed. There was soap and bleach everywhere. Trash bags scattered all over the floor. It was as if a cat had climbed up onto the counter and knocked everything down with its paw. We still weren't convinced and brushed it all off as nothing. Then locked the place up and went home. Things were quiet for a while after this, Until one day when I was in the laundry room on my own putting away litter boxes for the upcoming clients who were soon to come in with their kittens. I was looking down organizing when I see a black shadow running past the laundry room door into the treatment area. I thought a dog had escaped, so I ran out into the treatment area. There was no dog to be seen anywhere. Frantically, I asked my coworkers, who look at me like I was insane, if they had seen the dog. There was no dog, not even in the building. As time went by, I did not let this bother me since I love my job. A month goes by, and one of my coworkers proceeds to tell me that she believes that I saw a ghost, because the same thing happened to her. According to her story, she was going room to room making sure everything had been done. When she walks past a room, she sees a black shadow sitting on top of the exam table, assuming it was a pet left unattended. She ran back into the room to see who it belonged to. She peers back into the room to see that there was no pet. Dumbfounded, she thought of me and my story. How the black animal-like shadows have been appearing and insisted on telling me. Small things continued to happen, but nothing enough to where I had to quit my job. For example, I was filling prescriptions when all of a sudden, the X-ray gloves flew off the rack and onto the floor, as well as hearing voices or walking around upstairs. The eerie feeling you get when being alone in the building that you are being followed. Someone is behind you or trying to communicate with you. When you are there on your own and another presence is there. I will keep this story updated if anything persists, but I believe these spirits are just spirits of confused pets, wondering where their owners are, just trying to do pet things. For some background, I've been a behavioral health nurse for about 12 years, and my first job was at a freestanding mental health facility in the South. This facility is pretty uniquely constructed as it was originally a plantation, owned by a wealthy Irishman who emigrated here sometime in the 1700s. The original plantation house is still there. It's now used as the business office. The hospital itself was constructed to be attached to the house. If you explore the campus, there is a small graveyard with the original owner's tombstone, as well as some other family members of his. Additionally, there is a sign that says something along the lines of, "This is dedicated to the slaves that worked and died on this plantation." Anyway, one of the stories that has been passed down among the employees there for decades is that a young girl in the Irishman's family, one of his daughters or grandchildren, passed away on the plantation at a really young age, and her ghost still lingers around the house and the facility. There are certain patient rooms that have an unusual amount of paranormal activity. One day, I was walking past one of these rooms, when in my peripheral, I saw a young girl who looked to be about 9 or 10 years old, sitting on the bed. She was wearing a colonial-looking dress, appropriate for that time period in which she was alive, and looked at me directly in the eyes when I turned to look at her. I was incredibly startled. My mind raced for a few seconds, trying to convince myself that she wasn't there. I walked a few feet past the room, gathered my courage to go back, and she had disappeared from sight. She didn't have any ethereal qualities, nothing otherworldly or strange. She literally just looked like a real person sitting right there in plain view. During my time there, I never heard of anyone else who saw her as clearly as I did, but every once in a while, one of my coworkers or patients would experience something strange, like doors opening and slamming shut. I remember one patient in particular that ran out of his room white as a sheet and said that while he was lying in bed, his bathroom door slammed on its own. It was so loud I heard it myself from the nurse's station. This patient was there for addiction and had no history of hallucinations. Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.